In Silent Hill games, the design of the monsters always gives you clues about the main character. And since Walter Sullivan is really the main character of Silent Hill 4, this game is no exception. Meet Silent Hill Dog version 3.0. Despite being a survival horror staple, they always represent something in a Silent Hill game. Usually, someone's fear of dogs. It is a pretty common fear. In this case, it's Walter's fear of dogs, apparently triggered by the pet store, one of the places he used to visit on the way to visit the apartment. The pet store owner, Steve Garland, had a big scary dog. Also, he yelled at Walter when he knocked over a cage. Not surprisingly, Garland ended up being one of the 21 Sacraments. Walter leveled the place with a submachine gun and killed all the animals. The dogs in this game are pretty unique. They have long tongues that they appear to use as straws to suck up blood and whatever else out of their victims. They also have no obvious eyes, rat-like snouts, and they make jaguar-like noises. They're also lazy and easy to sneak up on. Just don't let them gang up on you. I'm not sure what the wall men represent. They are basically trapped in the wall, so maybe confinement. All I know is that they're very loud, can knock you across the room with one swipe, and are a serious pain in the ass. They come in two forms, a human-sized one that takes on the color and texture of whatever wall they come out of, and a huge one that appears to be grafted to some kind of framework that hangs from the ceiling. An entire room full of these makes up what is essentially a boss battle where you need to figure out which one is the real one. When you hit it, they all react, and when it dies, so do the rest of them. Monkey men. God, I hate the monkey men. They're everywhere in the city. They're nasty looking, and their noises are so repetitive you'll be hearing them in your sleep. Yeah, the sound effects in this game could have been better. I don't mind that this is a stock sound so much as it's only one of two sounds they make. It's short, and it loops over and over and over and over. Anyway, they represent humans in Walter's world. Yeah, Walter's basically an enemy to all living things. Speaking of bad sound effects, I mean, considering their abdomens are hollowed out, maybe it's the sound of air escaping when they get hit there. So a noise that sounded like a belch might have been the right level of disgusting, but yeah, this is just silly after a while. By the way, these are not nurses, despite how people like to call them that because they show up in the hospital. They're patients. Notice that they're a deformed version of the woman we see Walter operating on. With how big they are and their distorted faces, they're pretty disturbing to look at. Too bad the noise they make totally kills that. Excuse you. Walter Sullivan himself is essentially another monster. Well, he's an enemy anyway. He shows up repeatedly during the second half of the game and just makes life hell. I remember the first time I was in the forest, and after I went through a door, I heard it open and close again behind me and realized I was being chased by Walter. It scared the crap out of me, and from that point on, you never know when he's gonna show up.
Surprise, cockbag!
By the way, he has this laugh that is absolutely chilling. With the monsters, I saved the best for last. Or the most fucked up for last, anyway. The doubleheads. No legs, just a torso and a pair of arms with hands that they walk on. A cloak of some kind covers the rest except for a pair of blind infant faces. Their eyes may be closed, but they see you. When you're too far away to attack, they'll point at you and whisper, "Receiver." What's even worse is that the trailer shows them cooing and screaming like babies. For some reason, the game replaced that with some generic-sounding grunts and growls that don't really suit their appearance, which is a shame. I think the Doubleheads are just about the most disturbing monster in any Silent Hill game. They represent two of Walter's victims, number 7 and 8, young siblings Billy and Miriam Locane, who Walter apparently hacked to pieces with an axe. And they're the only victims who don't appear as ghosts in Walter's world. The leading theory seems to be that Walter feels some guilt over killing children, so they manifest as something more disturbing to look at than the ghosts. Speaking of ghosts, this game gives you yet another mind screw. Not only does every single person you run into before Eileen die, but they all come back as ghosts that want to kill you badly for some reason. And will come after you until you pin them with a sort of obedience. Of course, the only one we see Henry react to is Cynthia's. She has kind of a grudge thing going on with her super long hair and how she crawls and slithers on the ground. Jasper is perpetually on fire, and he's a bitch to kill if you don't have a Saint medallion. I kind of went into a panic here and accidentally selected an unlit torch when I meant to equip the axe. Yeah, it's my dumbass mistake, but it would have been easier to avoid if I was able to pause the game while changing weapons. Just saying. DeSalvo is really creepy. He appears to be really bloated and dances around with a huge smile on his face like he's happy as he sings the Descent of the Holy Mother scriptures. He also tends to float around really high right up until he's about to attack. Richard isn't too remarkable looking. He carries a pipe and can teleport, which is a serious pain. He also makes a creepy, croaking sound. Again, kind of reminiscent of the Grudge. Then there's the final boss. Okay, well, the final boss is Walter, but there's a little more involved here than just fighting Walter. First you have to attack this thing. And what is it? I guess Walter thinks it's his mother, but actually it's the cult's god. Some things don't add up, though. One thing that always struck me is, where did Walter's corpse go? Did it fall into the hole and somehow form this thing? I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but then again...
This is Silent Hill.
But anyway, Walter is insanely powerful until you injure the god. One theory is that the god is actually protecting him, which makes sense. The god wants to exist after all, and Walter is helping it along, so, like the cult, it's only looking out for its own interests. No love for Walter. There is one monster who definitely doesn't show up in this game, Pyramid Head. So thank God I don't have to put up with that stupid box head showing up and
Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday comes again.
So there's one character I haven't talked about. He's the least developed character, yet ironically he's the character you play as. Henry Townsend. Even translated memories in the instruction manual don't have much to say about him. There's one of two reasons. A, Team Silent got really lazy with this one, or B, he's meant to be an avatar of sorts. He's supposed to be the player. Which would sort of explain why he doesn't talk much. Maybe you're supposed to mentally fill in the responses as he stands around and listens to the other person talk. Only problem with the second option is that the game is too linear for Henry to really work as a player avatar. The only choices you can make in this game are a handful of things that affect which of the 4 endings you get. You don't really get to mold him as a character. If this is what they were going for, I really wish they had drawn out some of the conversations and let you choose what Henry says in response, like you can do with Alex in Homecoming.
You gotta be shitting me!
So what do we know about Henry? Well, the only concrete things I can think of is that he's a photographer, whether amateur or professional isn't clear, but his work is good enough to put up on the wall, and that he's been to Silent Hill. Other than that, it's hard to speculate what aspects of his personality come from the traumatic experience he's been through, and which ones were already there. Like, is he so quiet and withdrawn because he hasn't spoken to anyone for at least a week before the story takes place, or is he just shy? He has a kind of awkwardness to his body language. He kind of slouches and seems a bit clumsy, so I'm gonna say he's shy. But it's really a combination of the two. I mentioned before that the scenes involving female victims are much more dramatic than the ones with male victims. It seems like Henry just cares more about them. I tend to chalk this up to Henry being the opposite of Walter, in that Walter hates women, where Henry has a lot of respect for them. Or maybe he's just the sort of guy who is very protective of the women he comes across. That's kind of a running theme with the male leads in Silent Hill games. Harry's protective of Lisa and Sybil. James is off and on kind of protective of Maria, and he seems to care about Angela. I think he would protect her if she let him get within 10 feet of her. And later there's Travis with Alessa, somewhat. In the case of Silent Hill 4, I think the point is to make a contrast. The more Henry mourns the death or attack of Cynthia and Eileen, the more we realize how bad Walter's actions are. So Henry is shy, at least somewhat artistic, and caring. Though the latter's kinda hard to tell sometimes. I'll get to that in a minute. I think the game does a great disservice to his character by glossing over what he went through before the start of the game. All we get is a couple screenfuls of text telling us that he's lived in his apartment for 2 years. Oh, and by the way, he got locked in somehow 5 days ago.
I got a letter.
Silent Hill 2 actually started off in a similar way, but there's one big difference. We get to hear James fill us in on the details in his own words. And from time to time we're reminded through the dialogue of how much he misses his wife. I think handling Henry in a similar way would have gone a long way towards giving him better characterization. And that brings me to another reason why I think Henry's character is handled badly. There are plenty of opportunities for him to get some dialogue in during the second half of the game, but he barely says a word to Eileen after the cutscene where they decide to stick together, aside from calling her name a few times to get her attention.
Eileen? Eileen? Eileen?
And frankly, when you have Eileen saying stuff, especially when she's sounding hysterical, and Henry doesn't say anything back or react in any way because it's during gameplay, it kind of makes him come off, at best rude and at worst an insensitive jerk.
Are you okay?
And going by the earlier cutscenes, I really don't think that was their intention. This cutscene really got to me the first time I played this game because it's the first time it happens.
I can't use a ladder with my arm like this.
Wow. Really, Henry? You're just gonna leave her there in that room, alone, without a word? Not even about whether or not you plan on coming back? Nothing? Okay then. And that's one of those things that bugs me about this game. It brings two people together for the entire second half of the game and barely develops their relationship at all, aside from the good ending where it's hinted that maybe they're on their way to becoming a couple.
Guess we'll have to find a new place to live, huh?
And once again, Henry could have said something here, but no. I realize that the game really isn't about Henry, but they still could have developed him a little bit better as kind of a side story. But one thing I will say in Henry's defense is that I disagree with people who say he shows no emotion. He certainly isn't an outwardly emotional person, and that is kind of jarring, especially after Heather. But he displays plenty of emotion, it's just subtle. Could be because he's been numbed by all he's been through, or maybe he thinks it's not really happening so he's a little emotionally detached. Or maybe that's just the way he is. Everyone is different, and some people just don't have big reactions to things. Also, the instruction manual refers to him as a calm young man. Now, is this a good sort of character to have in a horror game? Maybe not. A lot of people come away from this game thinking that Henry is just completely dull and lifeless. Even among people who generally like the game except for one or two things, usually Henry is one of those things. Most people just don't give a damn about him, and it ruins their enjoyment of the game, so maybe it wasn't the best way to go. He doesn't get a lot of love except from fangirls like me who thinks he's a super mega hottie. Either way, here are some scenes where his reactions kind of stand out as convincing for me and generally gain my sympathy. When he finds Cynthia dying, you can almost literally hear his heart hit the floor. A few seconds later, it seems to really hit him and he has to avert his eyes for a second. Then there's his body language when he discovers Andrew DeSalvo's body. He actually gives himself a nasty shock trying to help Richard. If that doesn't show he cares, I don't know what does. And who could forget when he thinks Eileen is dead and it hits him so hard he collapses. And finally, when he stares down Walter right before that final battle, I think it's safe to say that Henry just took a level in badass. During the cutscene where you meet Joseph, you find out that Henry is indeed intended to be the final victim, number 21, the Receiver of Wisdom. Which makes sense, he's the one who's been made to witness everything, with no power to stop it up until this point. But I remember getting up to this part in the game and just being wowed by that.
Number 21, the Receiver of Wisdom, Henry Townsend.
It's like, sorry Henry, you're just another victim. Sucks to be you. Ouch. Henry is the only victim who doesn't seem to have any kind of history with Walter Sullivan. It seems that he was more or less picked at random. I know most people aren't exactly enamored with Henry's voice acting. I think it's at least passable.
I don't know where to start.
And I'd imagine that it'd be hard to do a voice that involves downplaying emotion and doing it convincingly, so I give him credit for doing a pretty good job with
I
it.
saw people getting killed.
If you wanted to know, the actor's name is Eric Bosick. Yeah, I believe IMDb in this case because the information was entered either by him or his agent. He looks a little like Henry. More recently, he's played the main character in a Japanese movie that was done in English called Tetsuo the Bullet Man. I haven't seen it, but it looks interesting, even if the trailers are confusing as hell. It's also been pointed out in a few places that Henry also resembles actor Peter Krause. I can kinda see it. Henry's cuter, though.
I feel like I'm dying.
It's okay. It's just a dream.